Hi everyone, this is Nimish and I welcome you to the 26th edition of Humans of VIT, TW, which is our weekly newsletter. Today we have with us Anirudh, who is a third year student in VIT. The topic that we have for discussion today is mapping World War III. So let's just get into it straight away. So Anirudh, my first question is, India has had some trouble with its neighbors in the past, especially Pakistan and China. In these times of heightened tensions, do you think a possible war could break out between these countries?
Right, so that's an interesting question, but then let me give you a really honest opinion here, right? Here is why a war will never break out, right? So there is something that, there's a theory that exists, at least in concept. It's called the balance of powers theory, right? One of the main reasons why we have international organizations such as the UN or say other organizations within the UN itself, individual bodies that were formulated, was simply because all states, nation states, be it China, India or USA or Pakistan, all of them acceded to one thing, that they would suspend their right to war, right? They came in collaboration, suspending their inherent right to wage war with one another, so that they realized that after the devastation that World War I and World War II caused, they wouldn't probably want to go into a third World War, and they felt that any extent of dispute could be resolved through diplomatic dialogue. So I feel that there are tensions in the borders, there are tensions in between India and China, but then there is nothing that can't be handled diplomatically. So I feel that balance of power still holds, and there are check mechanisms in the international domain that are still in play to prevent a war from happening. So, however, I just add that a war is different from a conflict, right? So
I'm sorry, a war is different from
a war is different from a conflict, a state of conflict, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not saying that there won't be skirmishes in the border. I'm not saying that India might not send its forces across the border to maybe have, say, a duel with the Chinese forces or the Pakistani forces. That is still allowed under law, right? That comes under what you call as an armed conflict, an internal and external. However, a full-fledged state of war, wherein the entire state as an entity is involved with, besides just military power play in terms of political, economical, and as far or in larger demographic of things, increase the amount of bloodshed, wherein there is a greater loss in terms of citizens and stuff like that, that will not happen. I think that will be kept under control.
All right. So, sure. So, just in case hypothetically, if another world war breaks out, it will probably originate from the Middle East. And considering that the United States of America has had a rocky history in the Middle East, and also their recent engagement with Iran after they killed Qasem Soleimani. So do you think that just in case, hypothetically, if a war breaks out in the Middle East, then it would more or less be United States' fault?
No, first of all, I wouldn't, is it like, if I have to just subtly disagree with your opinion. I don't think hypothetically, even if there is a war that's going to be breaking out, perhaps maybe the site of the war might be at least for the most part, at least the skirmishes might happen over the Middle East. But then I believe there is a greater potential for a war to break out between USA and China because of the entire trade war that these two countries have been having. Right, lately around, they've been the greatest stakeholders in terms of the global economy, and I feel that if there is anything, there is a very good chance that a war might break out over this economic skirmish, because these two countries have been head to head, and with the pandemic in play and USA and China, their relations worsening by the day, I feel that even if you are hypothetically constructing a situation, there might be a war between these two countries with soft proxy wars happening in the Middle East, because these countries back other countries as well. However, to address your question, I wouldn't entirely place the fault on the United States of America, although they're a very big stakeholder. One of the main reasons why things started getting a little bit heated up in the Middle East was because USA was an active stakeholder there. However, I still would feel I would place an equal amount of burden on countries like Russia, on countries like, say, Israel, and all the other individual stakeholders that play a part in the turmoil, in the skirmishes that happened in the Middle East, because these are countries that got involved simply because USA got involved, right? Israel got involved because USA backed Israel. Russia got involved simply because USA said, hey, we're coming to the Middle East. Russia is like, no, that's not going to happen, because if you are in the Middle East, we will be there too, right? And China backs Russia because China and Russia are good friends, right? So I would place the burden, perhaps 70%, 60% of the burden in the United States of America, because they were there just for the oil, and everything just started off from United States ambitions for oil. However, they claimed that they were there because they wanted to curb the ISIS. But again, you can't unilaterally attribute everything to the United States of America, because all said and done, they have done some really good things in the Middle East as well, in terms of curbing, like, stopping terror and stuff like that. You can't take it away. However, yes, again, there are multiple stakeholders. You've got Turkey, you've got Saudi, and in fact, a very interesting thing that could happen in the Middle East, like just to deviate on a tangent away from your World War analysis, is the Abraham Accord was just signed very recently, right? Between wherein, if I'm not wrong, Israel and I forgot the country, so I need to look it up. But then Israel and who's the other country? Iraq, I think. I don't know if I'm not wrong. But then two countries that were on polar opposites, they normalized ties with each other, right? Which has Saudi in sort of the dark, and that's going to create a lot of changes in the Middle East, at least with reference to Yemen, wherein these three countries, Israel and UAE normalized ties with each other, and they are very important stakeholders, at least from Yemen's point of view, right? And Saudi is now stuck because they do not know what to do. So this might also be a very good source of conflict in the Middle East, which can go either way, especially with China backing, China's involvement increasing in the Middle East right now.
Yeah. So since you brought in China into the conversation, and let's say a war breaks out between US and China, which could potentially lead to a bigger war. So obviously this war would not be fought like World War I and World War II. The means of fighting this war would be completely different. And we've seen allegations like the coronavirus was in fact a biological weapon. So just in case this war breaks out, how do you think that the rules of this war will be different, and what modern tactics these countries might employ to fight these wars?
Okay, so if it is a war, right? So let's just getting into a little bit of theory. So there is essentially nobody would call this a war anymore, right? Although we've seen terms get thrown like Kargil War or
exactly
stuff like that, but these are just figures of speech. The technical term for this would be an international armed conflict, right? At least when the armed forces of two countries get into an active state of attack with each other, we call that an international armed conflict. If it is internalized, we call it a non-international armed conflict, right? As far as the scale of this being concerned, yes, I would agree that if USA and China do get into a state of conflict, the proportions are going to be very high, right? But as you very rightly pointed out, it is not going to be like World War I or World War II, simply because of the fact that the tactics that, as you very rightly pointed out, might be used are going to be a lot more diplomatic. It's not just going to be brute force that's going to be acting between these two countries.
Yeah, exactly.
Because right now we have economic sanctions, right? So that could be a very important tool of statecraft that can be used, right? And economic sanctions not on each other but on allied countries, right? So that could happen, because if they're in a state of conflict, then they could use these kind of political tools to maybe dent the opposition, right? And there is another thing called fourth gen warfare, which is gaining a lot of popularity, which is using soft power, right? So what could happen is USA and China are really big actors, right? And they have a lot of allied states. So they could lobby these states into giving them information. They could use, their influence over the Security Council or in UN committees to maybe get their selective agendas passed, which has happened more often than not, right? These countries, you see countries using the left, right, and center. So that could be a very possible tool. And cyber attacks might gain a lot of popularity, because lately we've been seeing a lot of doxing that's been happening. And if you look at cyber maps, you see a heavy amount of cyber influx that goes in and out of China, right? And we've also seen elections getting hacked and rigged and stuff like that. And yesterday also there was a question that was thrown to Biden and Trump in the debate
about Iran
regarding
yes.
Exactly, right? So these are subtle clues, right? So that's happening, and people are moving to covert tactics, I would say. And it's a very in fact this particular cyber domain of attack, and whether you can quantify that to be an act of war, is a very active research topic that's happening. You have what you call as the Talon manuals, which is a document, which is like a very big document rather, which tries to apply the conventional laws of war. So we have what we call as the Geneva Conventions that define the rules of war right now. these things can happen, who's a combatant, who's a civilian, and stuff like that. They're trying to apply the same Geneva Conventions. They're trying to modify it and try and apply it to a cyber domain so that you've got like a better legal system governing the digital world as well. However, not much progress has been made. Research is going on. The Tallinn manuals haven't been accepted as legal documents. They're just like a reference document now. So I believe that could very well be a tangible possibility if these two countries just break into war. It's not just going to be a fist fight between them on war.
Exactly. So another thing which is important for our viewers to know is that what exactly is the difference between a war and a conflict. Like you rightly pointed out that in case these two entities engage, it's more like an armed conflict and not a war. So what's the basic difference between these two terminologies in a technical way, war and a conflict?
All right. So an armed conflict, at least as defined by the Geneva Conventions, is very simply that there are two parts to an armed conflict. You have a non-international armed conflict and you have an international armed conflict. So an international armed conflict is wherein a state takes on the forces of another state, and it's an active state of wherein you have the military forces of your state, armed officers of clothed officers or army officials of the United States of America engaging in a border skirmish, or at least like in a state of conflict with, say, the armed forces of China, right? You do not have any internal forces, or you do not have rebellious groups and stuff like that. To give you a very smaller example, I would say the Kargil War was a very chronic, concrete example of an international armed conflict, wherein you had the Pakistani forces taking on the Indian forces. You didn't have any internalized Indian groups or internalized Pakistani groups. It's armed forces, right? It is very imperative that these two must be the armed forces of the country, right?
Yes,
you
basically
can't
non-state
have
actors are not involved.
Exactly, very precisely put. You cannot have the Taliban taking on the Indian army. You can't call that an international armed conflict. However, a non-international armed conflict, which is a lot more common these days, because most conflicts that are active and have ceased to exist have been non-international in nature, are skirmishes within your own state, which can involve a state of conflict between two non-state actors within your state, or a state of conflict between one state actor and n number of non-state actors within your state, right? So that could also be quantified as a non-international armed conflict. Now, a war, the term war, at least in its proper definition, ceased to exist after the UN was formed. As I said, the UN was formed on the basis that states would not engage in a state of war, right? However, the concrete definition, I would say, to a state of to war is more long term. I would say there are extended protracted armed conflicts that happen, right? You have had armed conflicts between states that have been happening for like years together, but I would like to believe that war, if you say that two states are in a state of war, it has to have an extended time period to it. That's the first requirement, I would say. The second thing is it not only involves soldiers fighting with each other. As I said, it involves a lot of other things. You've got economic sanctions coming into play, you've got diplomacy coming into play, you've got several other things, and let's take World War II, right? So you had people cutting off rice supplies to one state, so that that would maybe the depredations there would maybe force the state that you're fighting with to withdraw a couple of soldiers, so that it would maybe make them weaker. So these kind of military/political power play techniques are a lot more common in war as opposed to an armed conflict. But again, for all practical purposes, I would consider a protracted international armed conflict to be a state of war. It's just that people don't use war as often because that for some reason they just agreed that we will not call this war because we've had two brutal wars already, so we don't want that to happen. But that hasn't stopped bloodshed.
All right. So now coming to the last question. How do you think that religion can be employed as a tool in these conflicts? Because as we have seen in the case of Israel and Palestine, the issue that is there now is about territory, but it originated as a religious conflict between Jews and Arabs.
Oh, all right. So it's very simple, right? So when it comes to a conflict, at least there are several reasons or teleological motives from where a conflict can stem, right? More often than not, it comes over territory. So if you take the South China Sea, right? That is, I wouldn't call that a conflict because China has not openly acceded to it being a conflict, because if you accede to a conflict, then laws apply, right? However, for all practical purposes, you could say that there is a conflict between the Scarborough Shoal and the South China Sea over who owns it, right? So you can have a territorial dispute, right? Now, Israel-Palestine is a territorial dispute as well. So it is over the territory of who has sovereignty over that. But then most territorial disputes, when it involves people, it extends to self-determination-based disputes as well, right? Whether people have their right to govern themselves. So a very concrete example of this could also be the dispute over Kosovo, right? Wherein the self-determination movement of people in Kosovo led them to have a referendum, and now they declare themselves to be an own state. However, politically, so many states today don't recognize Kosovo to be a state, but at least on the basis of a legal doctrine, Kosovo is recognized as a state. Now, as you said, once you have a self-determination movement wherein you have a group of people feeling that they have a right to govern themselves, naturally the way they identify as a group, right, wherein they unite, that could have a lot of parameters. They could unite on the basis of the language they speak, the culture they follow, and both of these things are intrinsically tied to the religion that they follow, right? So in Israel, it's Jews. In India, you have the Hindu-Muslim conflict, right? And that's very actively going on. So it is very true that most conflicts that stem from an ownership or from a territorial point of view will extend into it being a self-determination movement, which will consequently, go into something that's far deeper, which involves people identifying themselves to be a part of a group, which is that group could be religion, that group could be caste, that group could be culture. These things are it depends, it varies from conflict to conflict, but this is how religion as a tool can be used to maybe incite something or at least fight a war on somebody's behalf.
Beginning,
give the outro again. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Anirudh. It was a really insightful conversation. Thanks for educating all of us about the equations between various countries that are there in the Middle East. If you guys want to know more about the topic War and Peace, then do check out the next edition of TWE, which will be out tomorrow. Also, if you want to get featured in HOV, do DM us or put a comment in the comment section below. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.